Good morning. Today we remember those members of our church and community interred here and elsewhere during the past year. They are Darlene L. Worley, Frederick Harper Griswold, Lester W. Kirshner, Belva I. Rohrbaugh, Ethel M. Miller, Virginia L. Kaufman, Reverend Richard C. Weaver, William C. Booz, Jr., Wayne B. Lockman, Dolores A. Sullivan, Ronald Judy, Virginia Tressler, order. Thank you, young people. Teachers, lest we forget. This time, we will have two numbers by our word bank lady.
Our timing is pretty good. Our speaker this morning had church service in Jefferson, and we had planned the program around him just coming up, and we had to pace ourselves for the marching time that we had granted him originally. So all's well, he is here, and I'm happy to read to you his resume. Reverend Gene Edwards served in the U.S. Navy as an enlisted man, honorably discharged, then received a direct appointment in the U.S. Army Reserve as a second lieutenant, eventually rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel, graduate adjutant general, and ordnance advanced courses in command and general staff college. Earned a meritorious service medal with the Oak Leaf Cluster. Served variously as a training officer, company commander, public affairs officer, aide-de-camp to Major General Roland Kirks, as well as various duties in the Pentagon Office of the Chief of Public Affairs. And he retired from there in 1987. He is a graduate of the University of Baltimore with a degree in marketing and management, had a successful career in advertising, sales, public affairs, and sales. Upon retirement, like a cat, he had more than 2 careers. He's had his 3rd career. Upon retirement, attended Lancaster Theological Seminary, entered the ministry with the Disciples of Christ denomination, served in pastoral roles at the First Christian Church, Baltimore and Lemoyne, the Salem United Church in Columbia, Pennsylvania, and St. Paul's UCC in New Oxford, Lazarus UCC in Maryland, Trinity Ross UC, and Spring Grove, and currently pastor of Christ UCC Codorus. With that kind of a background, I welcome, and I'm sure you're welcome to hear what Pastor Edwards has to say. We welcome you. Good morning. I see he's wearing a Buddy Poppy. And by the way, the Buddy Poppy started in 1923. Bit of history, I thought I'd tell you.
Someone once told me that the more you can cram into your schedule each day, the younger you'll become. I think they were either kidding me or maybe even lying to me. Because if that's the case, today is such a day that I must be about 19. And I don't feel it. I literally, even though I did one time own a small airplane, I didn't use it to come up here today, but I did fly, I can tell you that. It was tough getting up here on time and all of that, but I enjoyed it because I wanted to be a part of this day. I took my military service very seriously, even though I didn't have to, in that I could have waited to be drafted, but I chose to go into the Navy instead. And once my tour was up there, I had a sudden revelation that, you know, military life isn't that bad. You want to consider staying in. Well, there was no way I was going to stay in as anything but an officer. The Navy, the Air Force didn't want me, but the Army took me. Bless their hearts. And I enjoyed it. I've had some wonderful times in my career and all of the places that I have been and people I've associated with. General Kirks is vaguely mentioned in my resume, but I must tell you, he is one of the most fascinating men that I've ever met in my life. He was a very close friend of Chief Justice Warren Burger, and occasioned me to meet the Chief Justice on several occasions. And the stories that he used to tell us during our drills and at times when we had social opportunities together were absolutely amazing. I mean, talk about your pecking order in Washington, believe me, I know something about that. And he certainly did as well. I'll never forget the Chief Justice. He was going to ride with the Chief Justice over to the Gridiron Club, which is a very nice, fancy event that's held in Washington. It was only for men at one time, but it's opened up to women. Men used to be able to smoke cigars, and I don't know if they allow women to do that or not. I guess they do. Today, everything is different, isn't it? But I remember him telling me that, now the Chief Justice told me, Roland, you know I have to be there before the President, don't you? So I have to pick you up promptly at 6 o'clock. And General Kirk looked up at him and said, well, I know, Mr. Chief Justice, but did it occur to you that I should be there before you? Such is life in Washington. I need not remind you what dangerous times that we live in today. There's unrest among nations throughout the world. Unrest seems to be, in fact, the order of the day in our own country. Our mores have changed. What used to be isn't anymore. The values that we once held so dear seem to have flown out the window. We see deadly shootings in our schools, shopping centers, other gathering places, even in churches. Is nothing sacred anymore? Have we lost it all? And our minds maybe along with it? The athletes we once respected no longer share our sense of values, preferring to sit or kneel instead of standing for our national anthem. Respect is mocked. Manners seem to be a thing of the past. And I dare not think of the repercussions that would occur had I, as a boy, used some of the language that I hear regularly on radio, television, internet. As useful as the internet can be, it can also bring hate to one's hearts and minds. I sometimes wish that it were possible for us to go back to some of those old days where we could go to a theater and watch something like Bambi instead of what passes for entertainment in our movie houses today. We're now in the baseball season, and we hear about a lot of million-dollar salaries and that kind of thing, inflated egos of many players. And if you look at the old-timer statistics in certain baseball encyclopedias, you're going to notice sandwiched between the familiar rows of familiar numbers like at-bats, hits, home runs, etc., there are some empty lines. A kid today might say, what are those empty lines? You mean he didn't play? What do you mean? Military service. Well, we can picture today's athletes demanding a private charter, but can we see him flying a Navy jet? As hard as it may be to fathom, Ted Williams, Stan Musial, Joe DiMaggio, and hundreds of other major leaguers had stopped playing baseball, usually in the prime of their career, so they could go off to war. And on this Memorial Day, with Americans headed to air-conditioned theaters all over the country, maybe even to watch a movie such as Pearl Harbor or something similar, it seems fitting to remember what happened to baseball back in 1941. Remember Hank Greenberg, just 30 years old, coming off his second MVP season with the Detroit Tigers. He was drafted 19 games into the 1941 season. He gave up a $55,000 salary. Now wait a minute. Back in those days, that was huge. That was a huge amount of money. But he gave that up and took a $21 a month Army pay. But he told the Sporting News, if there's any last message to be given the public, let it be that I'm going to be a good soldier. Remember Bob Feller? He was 23 back in those days. He rushed to enlist after hearing about Pearl Harbor, joined the Navy, served as a chief petty officer above the Alabama. Ted Williams is a name I know that you know. He hit 521 home runs despite interrupting his career twice and giving 5 seasons to his country. In 1942, he enlisted in the Navy and served as a flight instructor. And in 1952, he went to Korea. He was just 33 years old and completed 39 combat missions, was hit by anti-aircraft fire 3 times, and had to crash land his airplane twice. Joe DiMaggio, in 1942, became a $50 a month enlisted man. The point of all of this is, in those times, there were 5,800 players who were in the majors and the minors at the time of Pearl Harbor. And according to a 1945 New York Times story, 5,400 of them ended up in military service. And of that number, 50 died. Remember all of this the next time you hear an athlete say that he doesn't get any respect, or an announcer gushes about a golfer's courageous shot, or a sports writer describes a game-winning play as heroic. The real heroes were then. Remember all of this the next time an athlete says he doesn't get any respect. And remember, the men who got that respect earned it very deeply. I remember all of this because my family was probably, I guess we would describe ourselves as middle class back then. We lived in Baltimore for many of my young years, and our early home there was one of 3 in a row, anchored on one side by a tavern and a grocery store on the other end. Now, the tavern owner was very generous about rewarding me with 2 cents for each returnable bottle that I could find and turn into him. And I have to tell you that the so-called supermarkets of today are nothing like this little corner grocery store. I can well recall my mom and I would walk in. We were greeted by the next in charge. His name was Willie. And he would grab a cart and follow my mom and me through the store, placing items in it for her, making sure that he didn't put a dented can or anything like that in that she might find not worth it and turn it back in. And when we were all finished with that, well, he'd go up to the cash register, bring it all up, give her a receipt, and put it on her tab. And the tab was always paid on Fridays right after my dad was paid. Willie, though, would, right after he pushed his cart through the place and loaded up all the groceries in bags, then hand carried them down to my mom's house and to put them either on her kitchen table or on the sink. Can you imagine that happening in today's supermarkets? Tipping wasn't allowed, of course, but that's not to say that my mom couldn't offer Willie a wonderful fresh slice of her pie or cake or cookies if she just made them, and he was always a willing receptacle. Pleasant though it was, such a way of life then, it did have one drawback. Our home was heated by coal, which meant that a corner of the basement with a window had to be available at all times so that more coal could be dumped in there. And I know you ladies who have ever had a coal furnace know what a mess they are. They're terrible. And my dad would always fix a nice fire when he got home, and he'd bank the fire and stoke it and all of that kind of stuff, and make sure the house would be warm the next morning when we 3 kids got up and had our breakfast and then went off to school. It was much easier in summer months because back then there was no air conditioning, even in the department stores. They relied on ceiling fans, much like this. That was the only cooling air that you got in those department stores. And at home, we turned on whatever fans we had, opened the front and back doors so whatever breeze might be available could circulate. And of course, for safety and security, we always hooked the screen door. Hooked the screen door, that was our security. If there were ever any night intruders, I never heard about them. A different time, less advanced for certain. There wasn't even television back then. But it was, I believe, a more civil time, and neighbors, even in the big cities like Baltimore, would look out for one another. Our military service people were respected. Our national leaders were as well. And no one lobbied against the National Rifle Association, which even went into schools to teach and emphasize safe handling and use of guns. Those intent on using a gun for a crime usually made their own, and they were called Saturday night specials. Those were times worth remembering. Some of our times today, as sophisticated as we are, regrettably, are worth forgetting. Oh, for the simple life. Back in the dark days of World War II, I well recall the hard times that we civilians faced in the communities. Oh, nothing like what the service people were facing, I assure you. But we had our issues too. We had rationing. We had blackout curtains, air raid orders, many shortages of things that we were used to. And even as a boy, though, I will remember the concern nearly everybody expressed about wanting our boys home. I remember the World War II years quite vividly with an air raid warden. He cruised our blocks to make sure that no light could be seen through the blackout curtains. We were required to have them. And even a lighted cigarette or that little bulb in your radio, we were told, could be seen and that we could become a target. And when a possible raid or test was completed, sirens would signal it was okay to return to normal, such as it was. I also remember being 8 years old, and the only news, other than on radio, that you got was if you went to the movies and you saw this 5-minute newsreel that they produced. And on one occasion, I remember seeing 18-year-old Princess Elizabeth standing among bombed-out ruins of London. And she did this not for publicity, but to comfort her people and let them know that all was going to be well. Things were going as well as we could be expected, but we liked the odds, and we think it was all good. And of course, it's hard for me to watch Queen Elizabeth today and not recall that wonderful, beautiful young princess walking the ruins of London. But you know, I remember the things that we take for granted today because they were rationed during those awful war years. Gas, tires, in fact, most auto parts. Sure, many types of groceries, even ladies' nylons. They used to paint some kind of a substance on them. It was messy, and they always complained about it. And guess what? Sometimes old things come back to haunt you because there's a new tanning thing that you do just that to, and it's supposed to be quite popular from what I'm told. It is said that those who refuse to remember the lessons of history are most likely to repeat them. And we have a duty, an obligation to improve the mess we have likely at least helped to cause and make our lives, our home, our world a better place to live. And an easy starting place is a church, because despite our ecclesiastical differences, each teaches love over hate, right over wrong, and the value of each child of God. And when things get us down, we should simply turn the other cheek. And I should suggest to you that we turn that cheek upward. Upward. Ask for the guidance that is flawless and we can always rely on and will be freely given. The Civil War ended in 1865 and claimed more lives than any other conflict in U.S. history, and it required the establishment of national cemeteries. In that awful conflict, the figures vary between 619,000 and 750,000 dead on both sides. By the late 1860s, Americans in various towns and cities had begun holding springtime tributes to those countless fallen soldiers and decorated their graves with flowers, and they recited prayers and other pieces of literature. It came to be that a druggist in the small village of Waterloo, New York, began the effort to efficiently honor the fallen dead of that awful war by decorating their graves. And the idea caught on, so much so that General John A. Logan, the first general officer of the Grand Army of the Republic, issued General Order Number 11, which officially established what we know as Decoration Day. Flowers were placed on the graves of Union and Confederate soldiers in cemeteries throughout the village. Flags flew at half-mast, wreaths, crosses, and bouquets were the order of the day. Most were draped with mourning black streamers. And naturally, there were also speeches by notables. Read that as politicians. But there's also evidence that natives of the South were decorating graves before the end of the Civil War, which would even predated Waterloo celebration. There was a hymn published in 1867 called "Kneel Where Our Loves Are Sleeping" by Nella L. Sweet, and it carried the dedication on that page to the ladies of the South who were decorating the graves of the Confederate dead. Unless you think that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania didn't have a voice in all of this, think again. While it is only a dot on the map, and you're likely, if you're a casual driver, might drive right past it without even seeing it being there. But there is a little marker on the side of the road outside the town of Boalsburg. And it says Boalsburg, an American village, birthplace of Memorial Day. You see, it was a pleasant Sunday in October of 1864 when a pretty young teenage girl named Emma Hunter and her friend chose to gather some garden flowers and place them on the grave of her father, Dr. Reuben Hunter, who happened to have been a surgeon in the Union Army. And that same day, an older woman, Mrs. Elizabeth Meyer, elected to strew flowers on the grave of her son Amos, who was a young enlisted man in the ranks. He had fallen on the last day of battle at Gettysburg. And so they met these kneeling figures at nearby graves, the young girl honoring her officer father, and the young mother praying respect to her established enlisted man's son, each with a basket of flowers, which they had picked with their loving hands. They got to talking, and they decided that this needed to continue, and they made plans that the following year they would do so. They would talk to people in the town and get everyone involved, friends and neighbors alike, and they all heard it with enthusiasm and wanted to be a part of it. And that day came. It was July 4th, 1865, what had been planned as a little informal meeting of two women turned into a community service. All of the town of Boalsville was there. A clergyman preached a sermon, and every grave in the little cemetery was decorated with flowers and flags. Not a single one was neglected. But the important thing is, it doesn't matter which community was to first. What is important is that Memorial Day was established, because Memorial Day is not about division, it's about reconciliation. It's about coming together to honor those who gave their all. I don't know if you've ever heard of Moyna Michael, but in 1915, she was so inspired by the poem "In Flanders Fields," she wrote her own poem. We cherish, too, the poppy red that grows on fields where valor led. It seems to signal to the skies, the blood of heroes never dies. She conceived of the idea of these poppies to wear them on Memorial Day in honor of those who died serving during the war. She wore the first and sold them to her friends and co-workers, with the money going to benefit servicemen in need. And eventually, the project was taken over by the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the poppies made by disabled veterans. And they exist to this day. Jesus told his disciples, "Greater love hath no man than that he lay down his life for his friend." And we don't remember this or any Memorial Day in honor to glorify war, certainly, but rather to honor brave men and women who did more than their share. Because Jesus also told us, there will always be war and rumors of war. Nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. But when you hear of these things, do not be terrified, for the things must come to pass. But it will not be the end by and by. The Gospel of Luke tells us that every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. But before all of these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons. Dear friends, we rely on our faith in God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit to keep us in care. And on this Memorial Day Sunday, we remember those he gave us as tools to keep us free and on the road to righteousness. It's a long journey, this road, and there will be many obstacles along it. Many will seem insurmountable, but it is then that we have to call on that thing that we call faith and remember. One day, all peace did occur. There was dancing in the streets, jubilation in every home. Churches were full of people thanking God that it was all over, and we had won instead of the Germans or the Japanese. Life is scary sometimes, but we are fortunate that we have a loving God who watches over us and sees that we weather the storms. Let us remember the words of theologian Oscar Romero. Peace is not the product of terror or fear. Peace is not the silence of cemeteries. Peace is not the result of violent repression. Peace is the generous, tranquil contributions of all to the good of all. Peace is dynamic, it is generosity, it is right, and it is duty. And it is fitting that we remember it's the serviceman, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of the press. The serviceman, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. And it's the serviceman, not the campus organizer, who has given us the freedom to demonstrate. It's the serviceman who salutes the flag, serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag, who allows the protesters to even burn the flag. Let us do as Jesus says and seek peace at every opportunity. Let us continue to build our and our country's ideals on rock and not sand. And let us be united and not divided in all that we do in the name of God. And then, most of all, perhaps, let us remember, greater love hath no man. Amen.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Only we can remember everything that was said. But I do think that just remember part of it. And a good message for us to remember. It is at this time, of course, that I need to acknowledge all who have made it possible for this day. I certainly want to make it known that even though the weatherman was so improbable that we chose to stay indoors, but that the cemetery was well-groomed, and presentable. And to the speaker, I thank you. To the band, this is about the 144th time they've participated. Color guard, those who had planned to be here, such as the youth who, I saw someone seeing that we had water to keep us from dropping over, and those unseen and unheard verses that I had planted throughout the congregation. I see you did all right. And I would be quite remiss as you go out, there was mentioned the Glen Rock, Austin Grove, Post 403 member who's picked up his father's challenge, Bob Nicklow. Bob, would you please stand? The man that sees that we have flags on our cemetery, both the old and the new. And I understand that you have 225 flags on the old cemetery, between the old cemetery and the new. What, 45 of the old, about 180 on the new, right?
48 on the old, 177 on the new.
We thank you for your remembrance. If I were in class, I would say, now take note. We celebrate Memorial Day because of these numbers. Count the battle died. I'm counting battle deaths. There were 4,435 died in the Revolution. 2,260 in the War of 1812. 1,733 in the Mexican War. 292,557 in WW2. And 53,401 in WW1. 33,741 in Korea, 47,424 in Vietnam, 148 the Persian Gulf, 4,168 in Iraq. We pray for those who died and thank those who lived. Part of the celebration, of course, will be, this time we'll ask the Reverend Legion, Post 403, perform your Memorial Day services. We ask right outside your window. Following that, we have all in a moment of silence while taps is being played. Taps, you know, is the closure. And that, of course, will close our service as it closed today for those veterans. You know, the song of taps, day is done, all is well. Think of it as we have your service.
Like the squad fall out, assemble outside. Flag, team up. All who are able, please rise while we honor our deceased veterans.
Hop. Right foot forward. Flag. Reset. Home. Ready. Hey. Fire. Hey. Fire. Hey. Fire. Back. Ready. Home. Bugler. Sound off. Flag. Order. Home. Fall out.
In Flanders, Belgium, is one of the cemeteries of WW1, which we heard about and talked about today, but it's very meaningful, and I think it's appropriate to read that poem again by John McCree. In Flanders field, the poppies bloom, between the crosses, row on row, that mark out place, and in the sky, the larks, still rarely singing, fly scarcely heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago, we lived, felt gone, saw sunset glow, loved and loved, and now we lie in Flanders field. Take up your quarrel with the foe. To you from failing lands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. The poppies grow in Flanders field. There is a reply in Flanders field. Oh, sleep in peace, where poppies grow. The torch your failing hands let go was taught by us, again held high, a beacon light in Flanders sky that dims the stars to those below. You are the dead, you held the foe, and ere the poppies cease to blow, we prove our faith in you who lie in Flanders field. This concludes our Memorial Day service here at Stone Church. I wish to thank all of you who participated, came out, and at this time I'll ask Pastor Bruce for the benediction.
We have returned from the old cemetery anew, We're just here. And we're going out to live our lives. Life must go on, and life in Christ has such power to live on. May the courage of Christ Jesus give you courage to resolve the conflicts in your life. May it give you courage to tell the old stories about Jesus. And may you always share his love. Amen.